$20 says he can't even chamber it without help. The laughter moved down the firing line like a current finding its path. Fast, easy, the kind that needs almost no voltage to travel. Corporal Derek Ostrowski did not look at the recruit who'd said it. He didn't need to. The laughter confirmed what he already knew. The room was his. And the old man at lane 12 was the subject, and the subject was cooperating beautifully by simply existing. The man at lane 12 was named Thomas Hale. He was 77 years old. He wore a plain canvas shooting vest, faded olive, over a gray long-sleeved shirt, and khaki trousers with a crease that had survived the drive here, and boots that were old enough to have developed opinions about terrain. He was not tall, and he was not large, and he stood at the bench with the particular stillness of someone for whom a rifle range was neither exciting nor intimidating, but simply a place, the way a carpenter finds a workshop simply a place. The rifle on the bench in front of him was his own, a bolt action, the stock worn smooth at the grip and cheek well to the pale color of old bone. The barrel showing the surface oxidation of metal that has been kept clean, but not kept pretty. Not a modern rifle. The kind that existed before the philosophy of modern rifles had been fully worked out. Thomas Hale put his hands on the bench. He did not pick up the rifle. He stood looking downrange at the target, a standard silhouette, 100 yards, nothing exotic. With the same quality of attention he might have given a crossword puzzle, he wasn't sure yet was worth starting. Corporal Derek Ostrowski was 23 years old, 4 months out of School of Infantry, with the lean confidence of someone who had passed hard things quickly and had not yet had time to discover the difference between passing a hard thing and understanding it. He was at the scoring station 3 lanes down, supposed to be running the morning qual session for the 8 recruits lined up to his right, and he had been doing that until Thomas Hale arrived at lane 12 and introduced the opportunity. "Hey," Ostrowski called it down the line, loud enough for the range and quiet enough to suggest intimacy with his audience. "You want us to dial the target in closer? Maybe 50 yards? Give you a fighting chance?" Thomas Hale looked at him. His eyes were pale gray, the color of weathered concrete, and they carried the depth of something that had been compressed a very long time. Not cold, exactly, but not warm either. Occupying the temperature of deep water in a place where the sun didn't reach the bottom. He looked at Ostrowski for 2 full seconds with the measuring patience of a man calculating whether a response was worth the construction. "100's fine," he said. His voice was a quiet, dry rasp, unhurried. "You sure? Because the way you're holding that rifle, I haven't picked it up yet," Thomas said. A beat. Then Ostrowski grinned and looked at his recruits and found the faces he expected to find. "Right. Sorry. My mistake. Take your time." He leaned against the scoring station. "We're all day." The range at Quantico's Reserve Training Annex smelled of cordite and brass and the mineral oil worked into the wooden benches over decades of use. Ventilation fans overhead ran their steady institutional rotation. Down the line, 4 other shooters worked their lanes with the focused indifference of people who had their own concerns. The November light came through the high windows at a low angle, cutting the lane markers into strips of light and shadow. Thomas Hale reached into the canvas bag beside the bench and withdrew a cartridge box without haste. He set it on the bench. He opened it. He withdrew a single round and held it at eye level between his thumb and forefinger for a moment, not inspecting it, exactly, but orienting to it, the way a musician might hold a pick before sitting down. "1 round?" Ostrowski said. "Very economical. Usually all I need," Thomas said. Ostrowski looked at his men. "1 round, boys. Make it count." They obliged him. Thomas Hale picked up the rifle. The transformation was not dramatic. It was not the movie version of a man coming alive with a weapon in his hands. It was quieter than that, simply the sense of a tool meeting the person it had been designed around. A lock, completing a circuit. He lifted it with his left hand under the forend and his right at the grip, and he ran the bolt with a smoothness that was not practiced but simply present. The smoothness of someone for whom this action had become biological long ago and remained so regardless of the years between. He brought the stock to his shoulder. He did not rush the cheek weld. He did not look through the scope, because the rifle did not have a scope. It had iron sights, a rear aperture, and a front blade, the standard of a generation that had not yet outsourced its vision to glass. He stood at the bench for 10 seconds without firing. "Whenever you're ready," Ostrowski said. "No pressure, we've got lunch at 12:30. The recruits laughed. Thomas Hale fired. The sound of a bolt action in an enclosed range is a specific thing, shorter and more authoritative than a semi-automatic, the report arriving and leaving without echo, clean, the brass ejected. The bolt returned. Thomas Hale lowered the rifle and set it on the bench with the same unhurried care with which he had picked it up. Downrange, the target had a hole in it. Ostrowski squinted at the target through the scoring scope, and his face went briefly neutral. The neutrality of a man recalibrating, the expression of someone who expected to see a miss or a flyer, and is instead looking at a round in the center ring, tight to the X. He recovered. "Lucky," he said, not to Thomas. "To the range, to the general proposition." "Could be," Thomas said. "One shot isn't a group. Shoot 5. Let's see what the rifle does." Thomas Hale reached into the cartridge box and withdrew 4 more rounds. He lined them on the bench edge and fired 5 rounds in the time it took Ostrowski to stop grinning and start watching. Downrange, all 5 rounds sat inside a circle that would have fit inside a quarter, 2 of them sharing a single ragged hole in the X-ring. The range was quiet for a moment. "Okay," Ostrowski said, and his voice had changed slightly. Not much. Not enough to cost him the room, but enough that the recruits nearest him heard the change. "So you can shoot." "I've had some practice," Thomas said. "Iron sights at 100. That's decent. What about 200? Thomas retrieved a single round, raised the rifle, and put it through the center ring of the 200-yard target in the empty far left lane, an oblique angle that the lane geometry did not officially accommodate. Ostrowski stared through the spotting scope for 3 full seconds. Behind him, Private Dawson, 19, who had grown up hunting whitetail in eastern Tennessee and understood shooting in a way the others did not, said quietly, "Holy luck," Ostrowski said. But he said it the way people say things they are no longer certain of. Thomas said. He lowered the rifle. He began to wipe down the bolt with a cloth he produced from the vest pocket. The methodical care of someone who tended this instrument the way a good instrument deserved. He did not look at Ostrowski. He did not look at the recruits. He was simply in the small, complete world of the cleaning cloth and the metal, moving at his own pace. "All right," Ostrowski said, and now he pushed off the scoring station and walked the 3 lanes to Thomas Hale's bench with the deliberateness of a man making a commitment. "Let's make this interesting." He said it to the range, to the recruits, to the morning. "I'll put $20 on it." $20, he turned to face the recruit line, "that this man, at any range we've got on this facility, cannot make a center ring shot." He paused. The pause was a performance. He let it breathe. Blindfolded, the recruit line made the noise he'd been building toward. Not unified laughter this time. Something more uncertain. The sound of people who are watching the terms of a bet being set and are not sure who has the advantage. Thomas Hale stopped wiping down the bolt. He looked at Ostrowski. "What range?" he said. Ostrowski blinked. "What?" "You said any range on this facility. What range are you putting the target?" "A beat." 300, Ostrowski said. "And the blindfold?" Ostrowski went to the supply cabinet against the wall and came back with a cleaning cloth, the long black kind used for bore brushes, and held it out. Thomas Hale looked at it. He looked at Ostrowski. He looked downrange at the 300-yard berm, which required a ceasefire to use, which meant the range would need to be cleared, which meant time, which meant the performance had just required a level of actual commitment that Ostrowski had not fully thought through when he made it. "Call the ceasefire," Thomas said. "Set me a target at 300. Ostrowski called the ceasefire. Private First Class Amara Ndiaye was the range safety officer for the morning session, technically 21 years old, her RISO certification 2 weeks old, stationed at the range control booth with a clipboard and the authority to call ceasefire and the absolute authority she had not yet fully tested. She had watched the entire sequence from the booth, with the focused attention of someone who was filing things for later use. She had also watched Thomas Hale's group at 100 yards and at 200 yards oblique, and she had watched it the way her uncle, who had spent 20 years in the Senegalese armed forces, and who visited twice a year and spoke very specifically about what precision shooting looked like, had taught her to watch it. She picked up the range phone and called the training battalion operations desk. "This is PFC NDA at the Reserve Training Annex Range. I need to speak to whoever handles visiting civilian shooters. There's a man here. His name is Thomas Hale. He signed in this morning, and I think..." She stopped. She thought about how to say the next part. "I think someone here should know who he is." The ops desk put her on hold. The voice that came back was different from the one that had put her on hold, older, quieter. The kind of quiet that comes from a career rather than a temperament. "PFC NDI. You said Thomas Hale?" "Yes, Sergeant Major." "Thomas Warren Hale? White hair, gray eyes, bolt-action rifle with a worn stock?" Amara looked through the booth window at lane 12. "Yes, Sergeant Major." The silence on the line stretched for 4 full seconds, with the specific weight of silence that has something heavy in it. "Where is he right now?" "At his lane, Sergeant Major. There's been a ceasefire. A corporal named Ostrowski is setting a 300-yard target. He bet the man he couldn't make a center ring shot blindfolded." Another silence. Shorter, but denser. "Who else is on the range?" 8 recruits, plus Corporal Ostrowski, plus me." "Do not let the range resume until I get there," the voice said. "And Ndiaye, do not tell Corporal Ostrowski I'm coming." The line went dead. Amara looked at her clipboard. She looked at the range, where Ostrowski was gesturing at the 300-yard berm with the energy of a man narrating something to his audience, and Thomas Hale was standing at his bench, doing nothing in particular, holding the cleaning cloth that would serve as his blindfold and examining it with the mild interest of someone assessing an unfamiliar piece of equipment. She called another 5-minute ceasefire for safety reasons. Ostrowski looked at the booth and made a face. Amara looked at her clipboard. She heard the vehicles 7 minutes later, 2 of them, moving at a pace that the parking lot outside the range facility did not usually see. Doors, footsteps, more than 2 people, moving with the coordinated brevity of people who knew where they were going and had arrived. The range door opened. Sergeant Major Dennis Carver walked in first. He was 53 years old, 31 years in the Marine Corps, built like a man who had never considered the alternative to physical readiness. Behind him came 2 colonels. Behind the colonels, moving at the same measured pace but somehow occupying more of the available space, came Brigadier General Louise Marchetti. 2 combat tours. The Distinguished Service Medal. The kind of face that had stopped needing to do anything to command a room about 15 years ago. Ostrowski saw the stars. He came to attention so fast he nearly stepped backward into his own recruit. The party did not look at him. Sergeant Major Carver walked the length of the range to lane 12. He walked past the recruits, past Ostrowski, past the scoring station, to the bench where Thomas Hale was standing with a cleaning cloth in his left hand and the rifle resting on the bench and the 300-yard target visible downrange in the flat November light. Thomas heard him coming and turned. They looked at each other for a moment. "Tom," Carver said. His voice had lost everything professional. It was just a word said by a man who had wanted to say it for a long time. "Dennis," Thomas said. Carver came to attention. The salute he rendered was the sharpest, most breathtakingly precise thing Derek Ostrowski had ever witnessed in 4 months at Quantico. It was the salute of 31 years given form, directed at a man in a canvas shooting vest and khaki trousers with a cleaning cloth in his hand, held without movement while the ventilation fans turned overhead and the November light came through the high windows, and not a single person on the range made a sound. Both colonels were at attention. General Marchetti was at attention. Private Dawson, from eastern Tennessee, who understood what he was looking at better than the others, had gone completely still. Thomas Hale returned the salute, clean, complete, unhurried, and when his arm came down, Carver crossed the last 2 feet and took his hand. "You weren't going to call," Carver said. "I was here to shoot," Thomas said. General Marchetti stepped forward. She looked at Derek Ostrowski, who was standing at attention and had the specific pallor of a man watching the ground rearrange itself under his feet. "At ease," she said. "To everyone." The range exhaled. She turned to the lane. "Master Gunnery Sergeant Thomas Warren Hale," she said, and the title and the name together had a weight that the range absorbed without dissipating. "United States Marine Corps, retired, served 1966 to 1991. Vietnam, 2 tours. Beirut, 1983. Desert Storm, 1991. She paused. Master Gunnery Sergeant Hale served his entire career in reconnaissance and precision marksmanship instruction. He holds the Silver Star, the Bronze Star with Valor device, and the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal with Valor. He is the author of the USMC Scout Sniper Employment Manual, the foundational doctrine that every Marine Scout sniper is trained from for the last 34 years. She looked at the range, at the recruits, at Ostrowski. "The qualification standards your instructors hold you to, the standards in the manual, the standards on this range." He wrote them. He wrote them from notes taken in Vietnamese jungle, in the rubble of Beirut, and on ranges exactly like this one over 25 years. The range held its silence. "The range record," Carver said, stepping in. He looked at Ostrowski. "The standing record for iron sight accuracy at 300 yards at this specific facility. You know the name on it?" Ostrowski said nothing. He was beginning to understand the shape of what was happening. "T.W. Hale," Carver said. "Set in 1987. Never broken." He looked at the 300-yard target. He was going to break his own record this morning, apparently, which he does roughly every 4 years to check the facility's target calibration. He's been doing that since 1987. He looked at Thomas. Every time he calls ahead, every time the range coordinator knows he's coming. Except today, because the range coordinator retired last month and nobody briefed the new rotation. Thomas said nothing. He looked mildly at the 300-yard target. Ostrowski's jaw was tight. He was a young man absorbing a great deal very quickly. General Marchetti looked at him. Corporal Ostrowski. Ma'am, you have a bet outstanding. Ostrowski looked at Thomas Hale. He looked at the cleaning cloth that was meant to serve as a blindfold. He looked at the 300-yard target. Yes, ma'am, he said. You'll want to pay attention. Thomas Hale picked up the cleaning cloth. He handed it to Private Dawson, who was the nearest person, and who took it with the expression of someone who has been handed something historic and is trying to behave normally about it. Tie it, Thomas said. Make sure it's full coverage. Dawson tied it carefully. The cloth covered Thomas's eyes and the bridge of his nose. He stood for a moment with his hands at his sides, adjusting, not to the blindfold, but to what the blindfold changed. The range around him went very quiet. The way things go quiet when they understand they are watching something that will not happen again for a long time. Thomas picked up the rifle. He did not hurry. He found the grip with his right hand and the fore-end with his left, and he raised the stock to his shoulder and settled his cheek against the wood, and the movement was so practiced it looked like breathing, like a thing the body did without instruction. He adjusted his feet, an inch left, a fractional rotation at the hip, and he stood still. He was standing in a specific darkness that was not the darkness of the blindfold. He was lying in a Vietnamese tree line in November of 1968, 21 years old, and the target had been given to him in a briefing that consisted of a photograph and a grid coordinate and 4 words, "Do not miss this." The position he could not see, the wind he could not measure with instruments he did not have. What he had was a tree line and a leaf pattern and the smell of the air and the angle of the smoke from a cook fire 300 meters to his left. And he had the rifle. This rifle, or the rifle that this rifle had descended from through 30 years of maintenance and care. And he had the knowledge that had been given to him by a gunnery sergeant named Ray Ochoa, who was already dead by November of 1968, but whose voice lived in Thomas Hale's right shoulder and said, "The rifle knows, son, you don't aim. You let it tell you where to stop." He let it tell him where to stop. He squeezed. The report came and went with its clean authority. The brass ejected. Thomas Hale lowered the rifle and stood still for a moment, and Private Dawson untied the cloth from his eyes, and the range exhaled. Sergeant Major Carver was at the spotting scope. He looked for a long time. Then he straightened. He looked at Ostrowski. "X-ring," he said. The range was silent. Ostrowski looked at the target. He looked at the spotting scope. He looked at Thomas Hale, who was setting the rifle on the bench with the same care with which he had done everything else this morning, unhurried, methodical. The care of a man who respects the instrument. He reached into his pocket. He took out his wallet. He found a $20 bill, and he held it for a moment, and then he walked the 3 lanes to lane 12 and set it on the bench. Thomas Hale looked at it. He looked at Ostrowski. "Keep it," he said. Ostrowski shook his head. "No, sir, a bet's a bet." "Then give it to your recruits for lunch," Thomas said. He picked up the cleaning cloth from the bench and folded it carefully, and offered it back to Private Dawson, who held it for a moment like a man deciding whether to return a book that has changed him, and then quietly put it in his cargo pocket. Thomas pulled the bolt and cleared the chamber and began breaking down the rifle for transport. He worked in silence. Around him, the range was recovering its ordinary rhythms, or trying to, the fans turning, the November light shifting, the institutional morning continuing. But the ordinary rhythms were not entirely what they had been an hour ago. Several things in the room had been reordered, and the reordering was the kind that doesn't go back. General Marchetti stopped beside him. "You should have called ahead," she said. The range coordinator retired. "I know," Thomas said. "I'll call ahead next time. We would have had a proper reception." Thomas looked at her. Those pale gray eyes, the compressed depth. "I don't need a reception," he said. "I need a functioning range with calibrated targets." He looked at the 300-yard berm. "The targets are slightly high at 200. Has been since my last visit. Someone should look at the berm." Marchetti looked at Carver. Carver wrote something in his notebook. Thomas Hale shouldered the rifle case, picked up the canvas bag, and put on the gray felt hat that had been sitting on the bench the entire time. He nodded to the general, to Carver, to the range at large, and he walked toward the door with the unhurried, purposeful stride of a man who had finished what he came to do. At the door he stopped. He turned back and found Ostrowski in the room. "Corporal," he said. Ostrowski straightened. "Master Gunnery Sergeant." Thomas Hale looked at him for a moment. "You've got good instincts," he said. "The way you read the range this morning, the way you worked the room, that's not nothing. Instructors need that." He paused. "But the instincts work better when they're pointed at the problem instead of the person. A beat. There's always somebody in the room who knows something you don't. Make a habit of finding out who before you set the terms." He pushed through the door. The November air outside received him. The Quantico morning, the parking lot, the ordinary world of the base going about its ordinary business. And then he was gone, moving at his own pace toward his truck, the rifle case over one shoulder, the canvas bag in his left hand, the gray hat level on his head. 12 weeks later, on a cold February morning, Corporal Derek Ostrowski was at the range early. He had been coming in early for 6 weeks, working the iron sights at distances his duty description did not require, without glass, without technology, because there was a record on the board at 300 yards set in 1987 that had not been broken. And Ostrowski had decided, in the specific way that young people sometimes decide things after being properly humbled, that he was going to understand why. He was at lane 12 when he heard the door. Thomas Hale came in at 0600 with the rifle case over one shoulder and the canvas bag in his left hand. He stopped when he saw Ostrowski. He looked at the range, the iron sights, the lane 12 setup, the 300-yard lane already flagged and open. He set down the canvas bag. He sat on the bench beside the lane and watched Ostrowski shoot without comment for 10 minutes. Then he said, "Your left elbow is doing something on the squeeze. Drop it a quarter inch." Ostrowski dropped it a quarter inch. He shot a group at 200 yards that was the best he had ever shot. He lowered the rifle and looked at Thomas Hale, who was watching the target with the mild, interested expression of a man checking work. "Again," Thomas said. Ostrowski shot again. They were on the range until 0900. Thomas Hale spoke 14 sentences. Every one of them was necessary. There are men who have given the best of what they knew to institutions that outlived them, and to doctrines that train the next generation and the generation after that, and who return not for recognition, but because the work is still interesting, and the targets still need calibrating, and there is always, somewhere, a young person who is pointing their instincts in the wrong direction, and could be pointed somewhere better. They do not ask to be known. They ask for a functioning range. The knowing, if it comes as a consequence of showing up and doing the thing with the same integrity they have always done it, whether anyone in the room understands what they are looking at or not. If you were moved by Thomas Hale's story of quiet courage and timeless wisdom, hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to see it. And be sure to subscribe to Veterans Valor for more stories of America's unassuming heroes.